So my name is Robin Poole, and I currently live in Eugene, Oregon, and I run 3 businesses. So my main business is tutoring students for the SAT and ACT. I also do study skills and some college counseling, and that's online and in person. And I've been in that market space for 20 years, and I've had my own business for 15 of those. I also buy things at thrift stores and resell them online, mainly because I love buying things at thrift stores and I have too much stuff. So I just am clearing out more space for myself. And then the third thing I do is I make jewelry and handicrafts, which I sell online and in person. So like these pair of earrings right here, which I made. And I started that business when I was 8 with some bunny stationery, which I made with thumbprints. And I sold at a local kids crafts fair. And I was totally hooked. And I've basically been selling crafts since I was 8.
Since you're going to be inspiring many younger girls and women with this interview, who was your biggest role model when you started, I guess when you started your first company when you were 8 and when you started your other ones?
So my biggest role model has always been my mom, who is not an entrepreneur in a formal way. She's a scientist. She's a famous astronomer, but she's known within her field for starting and pioneering these big projects. So like you might have heard of the Hubble Space Telescope. So she's the person who ran the team that built the first big camera on the Hubble Space Telescope.
That
And
is
she
so
has,
cool.
yeah, she has this tradition of just starting new things. And you can Google these if you want to know. So like the Center for Adaptive Optics, which pioneered using computer technology to adjust for the blurriness of the atmosphere, for example. Yeah, or the Keck telescope, which is the 10-meter telescope in Hawaii, which at the time it was built was the biggest telescope in the world. And in fact, people didn't believe it could be done. But mom believed that her engineer had a plan that would work. And so she basically like pushed the whole thing through. So mom has always been somebody who just had a good idea and made it happen. And that was really inspiring to me.
That sounds like a perfect role model for an entrepreneur.
Yep.
What about right now? I'm sure she's still your role model, but do you work with a mentor or a business coach or anything like that?
I don't. I've always kind of wished I had a mentor and business coach, and I think it would have been nice to have found one. But part of the problem I have is I have a lot of health problems, and which is part of what led me starting my own business in the first place, because I just couldn't work in traditional office environments, and I can't start at 9 a.m. and work straight to 6 p.m. I need naps in the middle of the day. And so I've never really found anybody whose approach was as kind of uniquely flexible as mine was. And I mostly just kind of wing it. But I do read a lot on the internet. So I'm less reading about, blogs and productivity techniques and that sort of thing.
Yeah, everyone's your mentor.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so as every entrepreneur knows, there are ups and downs. What would you say has been the most disappointing or difficult part of entrepreneurship?
I think the most disappointing part has been my inability to learn to like my business. I just, I spent 15 years trying to like tutoring for the SAT. And I did, and I went through like long lists of like pros and cons and what do I not like, and I fixed everything I could possibly fix about it, except I just can't fix my elemental distaste for the SAT and the ACT, really. And what I've realized, and part of what kept me going, is that all of my clients, and my friends are like, oh, you're so good at this, you're helping so many people. Everybody else likes this business for me. And it's really great in a lot of ways. It's flexible. I can do it despite my health problems. I'm good at it. I'm helping people. Like, there are a lot of pluses on paper. But I finally come to realize that my personal values do not fit well with standardization. And the idea that I have to standardize my students' thinking so they can do well on a standardized test is just, it just doesn't make my soul happy. Now, on the plus side, I've managed to make a living at this business, and I've done a lot of good. And I don't feel like it's like I've had a horrible 15 years in this business. And I have many students whom I love and have enjoyed spending time with and are still friends to this day. But at some point, you have to just say, I am who I am in certain elemental ways. And you've got to find something that really works for you.
Definitely. I think entrepreneurship offers a lot of flexibility, like you were saying, with the hours, and you can change it whenever you want. So it sounds like self-reflecting has gotten you somewhere so far. In addition to your reflection, what helps you when you're facing a challenge in entrepreneurship or a turning point, and just when you're having a hard time, what do you do when you're stuck?
So at one point, I was doing group classes for tutoring for the SAT, and I just hated it. I hated group classes. I hated the whole me in front of 30 kids, and I couldn't help them individually, and some of them were paying attention and some of them weren't. And I just and at some point I was like, wait a second, I own this business. I don't have to tutor group classes if I don't want to. And then at one point we had a lot of business and people were like begging us for help, and I was tutoring 8 hours a day, and I was like, wait a second, this is my business. I don't have to tutor 8 hours a day if I don't want to tutor 8 hours a day. I realized that's the great thing about entrepreneurship, is if you don't like something, you have the opportunity to fix it. Like if you're having problems with your boss, that's on you, because you're the boss.
Yeah.
Right? Like I can't stand around the water cooler and complain about my boss because that's basically me. So I always am thinking to myself, there's some things you have to do. You have to provide the product for your clients that you have promised them. But there's no need to promise the next set of clients the identical product that you promised the last set. You can always do some sort of tweaking to help yourself be more comfortable with the situation.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think every entrepreneur learns that more than once. That's also the benefit.
Yep, it's true.
So going off of that, what else would you say is the easiest part or the most rewarding part of entrepreneurship?
I think it's related to that, and it's the ability to do things the way I want to do them, and not to have to be like every other SAT tutor out there. So this is a realm where there are plenty of effective SAT tutors. And I would never say, oh, you have to go to me or else you'll be suffering, because I think other people are also good at this job.
Right.
But I do know that I have a particular interest in really helping students from a kind of psychological and emotional standpoint. And I often help entire families with parenting tips and dynamics. And I had a student today who can't quite, and because his mom and I are basically like that too. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe it's time for you guys to change and model talking about your emotions so that your son can then talk about his emotions. So, people often say that working with me feels like therapy. And I'm fine with that. And if you don't like that, there are many other SAT tutors out there who do not do therapy. But what I know is that there are some kids who really like that, and some families who are like, wow, you've really helped our entire family, dynamic. And I like not having any boss looking over my shoulder going, Robin, why are you wasting time discussing emotions? You're supposed to be talking about the Pythagorean theorem. And for a while, I was afraid of that. And I was afraid that parents were going to be mad at me because we spent 15 minutes talking about some test at school or something. And then I was like, I own this business. If they don't like that, they can find another SAT tutor who's going to be all Pythagorean theorem all the time. So yeah. I like that part about being my own boss.
Definitely. That's nice. You can explore other areas at the same time. So do you know what your next business, if you slow down on the SAT and ACT tutoring, are you thinking of going more into therapy, or do you know yet?
Something like that. Yeah. So I'm still trying to figure this out. But what I realized the other day is that, if you're a parent and you have a child with athletic gifts, you know what to do. You get them on sports teams, you get them at the playground, you get them a membership at the rock climbing wall. If you have creative gifts, you get them art supplies, you get them art lessons, right? What do you do if you have a child with emotional gifts, right? Or spiritual gifts? Let's say your child is really interested in spiritual things. Unless the parent is also interested in that, most parents, they don't really know what to do with those like really sensitive kids, or the kids who are like, Mommy, I see spirits in the trees, right? Parents are like, that's not real, you'll grow out of it. Or sometimes sensitive kids make parents uncomfortable. Mommy, you're being really mean to Daddy. I think he might leave you if you're not nicer. And a lot of parents they don't want to hear that, because that's bringing up their internal issues. And so I think a lot of the students that I deal with who have anxiety, that's kind of pervasive. It doesn't go away with just like breathing exercises, or
Right.
visualization. I think a lot of them have those sort of emotional or spiritual gifts, and there's just no training for that. And so they're kind of like these super sensitive people that are stuck with not knowing really how to work with those things that they may be feeling. And I think it'd be cool to start some sort of business helping those kids and giving them that sort of training, which just doesn't really exist in modern society, but it's existed in many other societies. There's no reason why we can't bring it back.
Definitely. I like that mindset. Sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, yeah, it's been really interesting.
So you've touched on this a little, and what you just said too ties into it. What have been your most satisfying moments in business?
The most satisfying moments for me are the ones where I think I helped that person in a way that nobody else could have. There are a lot of my students who I think would be fine with no help. So they come in with decent test scores and they get better test scores, but their test scores were good enough originally that they would have been fine without me. Or they're not very hard to help, and all they really needed was the Pythagorean theorem, which I provided, and any tutor could have made that jump. But there are a few kids over the years where I felt like, wow, I was really the right person for that student. Like I had a student a few years ago who came to me as an 8th grader, and he had lots of learning issues. He was in a special school, and his parents were like, we're not even sure he's going to get to go to college at all. Like, they weren't even sure that he could even make it to college. I'd worked with the older sister who was a more traditional student. That's how they knew about me. And I saw him almost once a week for about 3 years, a long time. And he ended up in the honors college at Appalachian State. And he was a great student. Yeah. And he just really needed to learn how to learn with his learning issues, like from the ground up. And we started with really basic sorts of things. We started with comic books because he couldn't really even read a regular paragraph and actually like retain it. And so that's one of those things where I look at him and I think, if he hadn't come to me, his life might be really different for what it is right now.
Sounds like you've had quite an impact on a lot of people.
I have.
You
That's
had-
one of the best things about this business. And
yeah.
the nice thing is because of the internet, like in LinkedIn, I just got a message from a student who graduated 3 years ago over LinkedIn, and he's telling me about his life and everything that he's done. And he was another one of these people who was really having trouble with the test and ended up getting a scholarship from the school that he went to because he was able to raise his reading score so much. Yeah. So
that's great.
Yep.
So switching gears a little to more technical questions, I guess. What do you think are the top 3 skills someone needs to be an entrepreneur, a successful one?
I think you need to be really self-motivated. There are some people who need somebody else to stay on top of them to get stuff done. And as an entrepreneur, you wear a ton of hats. You do, especially at the beginning, right? Product design, marketing, merchandising, sales,
Everything.
like all that stuff, right? And you got to be somebody who's just good at getting yourself to work. Because usually what happens is there's some stuff that doesn't feel like work and it's really fun, and other stuff where you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I have to send these emails. I can't, whatever, but you just have to do it. So yeah, you have to be self-motivated. The second is, I think that you have to have some passion for what you're doing and selling, because other people will only be as excited about it as you are. So if you're not willing to be excited outwardly, like maybe you're excited inwardly, but you can't communicate your excitement, that will be a problem, because otherwise nobody will know how great your product is if you cannot tell them, or manage to hire people who can tell them. But usually at the beginning of starting the business, you probably have to tell them yourself. So yeah, so you have to be able to communicate the benefits and positivity about your product, whatever it is. And then I would say the third thing is you have to be really flexible, because you never know what's going to succeed. You have some product and people love this half, but they hate that half. And then you have to either ditch that half and rework the product, or figure out what's wrong with that half and improve the part that people don't like. And, and all of a sudden, so you're selling out of a storefront, and then there's COVID, and now you're like, oh, okay, I got to get my online sales, together. And then the challenges that companies face when they're small are not the same as the challenges that companies face as they get bigger. So people who are very good at the challenges of one-on-one may then struggle when the company starts to scale up, and you'll have to do a whole bunch of new things. Like for us, it was a big transition when we started hiring other tutors. Life was easy when I was the only tutor, but then we started hiring other tutors, and all of a sudden I became a manager, and there was a whole extra level of complexity. So it's not a great fit for somebody who just wants to go into the office and do the same thing every day, because you always have to be looking for what's coming next and how am I going to prepare for that.
Yeah, wow, that was great advice.
Yeah, what did I say? I said make yourself do the work, passion for your product, and the ability to be flexible and adapt.
Yes, those are definitely some top 3.
Yeah.
So you mentioned COVID, and most of your company was already online with tutoring, right? But
yes,
has
but
it?
it wasn't before that. The reason it went online is that we moved. So actually it was mostly in person. It was 90% in person for the first 12 years of our business.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was a switch.
So was it a big transition to go online?
It was, but you can wear your pajamas from the waist down. So I dig that.
Exactly.
Yep.
So how do you think coronavirus impacts entrepreneurs? Do you think it opens more doors or makes it harder? And how has it impacted you guys?
I think it goes back to the flexibility issue. What I see about the coronavirus is that it impacts different areas of the country differently. So there's some areas of the country that are totally shut down for in-person sales, and you only can really sell online or via the phone or something like that.
Right.
And then there are other areas where in-person sales are still a thing. So if you have product in a local store and you are in Eugene, Oregon, for example, you can still sell product out of a store here. But if you're in California, in the Bay Area, you may not be able to do that. And even though we can sell product out of a local store here in Eugene, is that going to be true 3 months from now? We don't really know.
Right.
So my experience is that many people have a strong preference for selling either in person or online. And I think the main thing is that if you want to be an entrepreneur going forward, you've really got to make sure that your online presence is good. And then whatever you can sell in person is also great. And it may be that 10 years from now, we're all looking back on that one Corona year we had, or it may be that 10 years from now, we've had 5 Corona years and we alternate in person, brick and mortar, Corona, brick and mortar, Corona. So what I can see about this is that the businesses that have thrived in COVID are the ones where they were able to make the transition to online smoothly. And it's just honestly lucky that we happen to be already online, because we had to make that transition the previous year when we moved.
Well, I guess that lined up well for you guys. Prepared.
Yeah, and it's funny because I ended up giving a lot of advice to people who were moving online. I was like, oh, right, I remember when that happened. So I was ahead of the curve.
So how do you address gender and diversity in the workplace? I know you said you hired some other tutors. Do you still work with them, or is it just you now?
No, it's just me now. That was another thing I discovered I hated, which sadly I kind of knew. And hate is a strong word. I liked the people I hired, but I didn't like. So what happens is, you might remember, right? I said that my tutoring is more like therapy. So regular tutoring works fine for like 80 or 90% of students. And whether you have therapy tutoring like I do or regular tutoring, as long as it's competent, 80% of your kids are going to do fine. 20% need therapy at some level, either because they're very anxious or because they're unmotivated or because they're resistant or because their parents are putting the wrong kind of pressure on them at home or for whatever reason. And what I discovered is that the people I hired were great with the 80% of kids who didn't need therapy, but I could never manage to teach anybody to do therapy the way that I did. Despite the fact that the people I hired were lovely people and talented and worked hard, and they by and large did everything I could want an employee to do. There's something I do that just most people don't. And so what happened is that those 20% of the kids, we weren't having the success with them that we wanted. And they were kind of falling through the cracks. And so that's partly why we decided to get smaller. Also, it turned out for our business model, we didn't actually make any more money when we hired other tutors because we then had to pay the other tutors and we had to rent an office space. So we didn't improve the bottom line. We just improved or deproved our stress level by having the business be much larger and more complicated. So one of the things we did is stop hiring other tutors. But we did have a pretty diverse workplace. We had people of all level, people with graduate degrees down to people who just graduated from high school. We had people of various ethnicities and backgrounds and things. I think that gender is not such a big issue in my line of work because I'm in education.
Yeah.
So it's pretty standard for women to be in education. But the bigger issues that we've had to deal with regarding gender and diversity is not so much among the people that we hired, but rather with the students that we worked with.
Right.
And the main thing that I discovered about gender is that men and women communicate very differently. And that what fathers are looking for in an SAT tutor is pretty different from what mothers are looking for in an SAT tutor overall. There are always exceptions, but the dads ask lots of questions about like, what is my plan? What are my qualifications? What is my success rate like? What is the percentage of improvement of my students? And moms ask a lot of questions about like, how much do I care about my students? What do I do if they have problems? Like, how do I talk to them? How do I relate to them? So the dads want to know like what the plan is, and moms want to know that I like care about this kid and can help. So I like to tell a story, this is a story of one of my students actually who wrote her college essay about this. And she was basically the only girl on the robotics team at her school. There were like 30 guys and one girl, her, on the robotics team. And she spent the entire semester being like ignored and talked over, and nobody paid attention to her. And she was fuming, like these guys were so insensitive and they were so sexist and they didn't respect anything she said. And then they were at the state robotics meet at the end of the year, and the robot wasn't working. And the guys were all like huddled around the laptop, fussing over the programming, and nothing was happening. And she noticed something, and something in her just like snapped. And she strode up to the robot, grabbed it out of the hand of the guy who had it, and said, "Dude, the wheel is stuck." And like fixed the wheel and put it back down, and instantly the robot worked, and they won like second place in the state or something like that.
Oh my gosh.
And the guys' attitudes towards her completely changed. And they were like, "Yo, dude, that was awesome." And they like clapped her on the back, and they became some of her best friends.
Wow.
And she realized two things. First of all, they weren't sexist. She just wasn't speaking their language. Now, that does not excuse them. They should have listened to her. They should have made her feel part of the team. But she realized that the assumption that she'd been making that this was all about gender was wrong. And then the other thing she realized is that while she was fuming in the corner for the entire year, she had been observing how they talked to each other. Mm-hmm. By interrupting each other, by grabbing the robot, not by building consensus, by fixing the wheel themselves, by saying the word dude constantly. And somehow she had managed to absorb this. And then when the moment came, she was able to speak in a way that they understood. And so that's what I would say about, women and men speak differently. They're acculturated, they're raised differently. But that doesn't mean you can't learn to communicate. It just may take some trial and error and some issues and some learning to put yourself out there. I've learned a lot about gender differences and how men and women relate to trials and challenges, and learning all of that stuff has been really helpful to me to evaluate, when am I afraid to stand up for myself? When am I thinking that somebody else's idea is better than mine? Because ultimately you can't change how other people are treating you. You can only change your own actions. And so I think that's the thing really to focus on, is what can you do as an individual to change the way you're interacting with others?
Definitely. Self-reflection is key in all of this, I think.
Yeah, it's true.
That was a great story. Wow.
I know, right? It was a good essay.
So from when you were 8 years old to now, do you think the entrepreneurial space has changed? Either just in general or relation to women and ages?
Well, I mean, a lot of things have changed, right? When I was 8, there was no internet. So that's big. Like in-person selling, much more selling was in person when I was younger. And even just since I started my business 20 years ago, when I started it, we really didn't have very much internet. And took me a long time to get a cell phone that even had a text messaging system. I used to get all my progress reports on the phone, and so I feel like the method of delivering goods is different. And right now, to sell on the internet, you have to be able to establish the value of your product entirely with words and pictures. There's no guarantee that anybody's going to watch the video of you.
Yeah.
And so I think there are different types of communication skills that are important now. But the fundamental of I am providing a product that somebody wants at a price that they can afford is really what that comes down to. So I was reading something the other day that was talking about how the sweet spot for entrepreneurs is the overlap between what you want to provide and what somebody else wants to purchase. And the question is, where do those things overlap? Because sometimes we can provide things that we think are awesome, but nobody wants to buy them. Or other people are like, do you guys offer such and such? And I'm like, I'm not doing those group classes. I've had many requests over the years for group classes, and I always turn them down because I hate them and it's my business. So you have to figure out, what do I want to provide and what will somebody pay me for? And then, is the amount that they'll pay me worth my time and money to provide that, whatever it is.
Right.
But the bottom line is that everybody has something to provide, and everybody wants and needs stuff. So don't be surprised if it takes a little while to figure out what that sweet spot is for you. So I had a student once who started a business making preppy backpacks. He was like, why is it that every backpack looks like it comes from the North Face? Right? They're all these gray, drab colors, super industrial. He's like, what about the backpack for the preppy kids? And so he had this whole thing. He was sourcing them from China. He had distribution, manufacturing. He was going to make seersucker backpacks and pink and green backpacks and stuff. And he was talking to me about this, and he's like, yeah, he put in $10,000 of his own money, which he had saved up from some other businesses. And he's like, I basically think this business is going to fail. But I figure that I will learn the lessons that I need to learn so that when I graduate from business school and start my real business, then I will, be able to be more successful. And I'm like, I'm not sure I'd be willing to put up $10,000 and plan to lose all of it to learn some business lessons. And I was really impressed with this guy's long-term vision and the thoughts and plans that he had. And I don't know if the preppy backpacks ever, really got off the ground and whether that went anywhere. But the point is, he didn't say, I've got to hit it out of the park the first time. He was like, here's my idea, here's my plan. I think I'm going to learn some stuff. And that's the great thing about starting a business as a young person. When I started my business at age 8, I had no idea that there was a cost of supplies because my parents bought all my supplies for me and I just used my art supplies and it was great. And I remember when I started my next business and I was like, oh, wait, I can't afford to buy those expensive high-end envelopes because those cost more than I'm actually selling the product for at the craft fair. So when you're young and you probably are not trying to support yourself, that's a great time to just start any damn thing you want. Give it a try, see what happens, learn some lessons, and everything you learn is just going to help you get closer to what the right product is for you, if that turns out to be something different.
Yeah, that type of flexible mindset, like you said before, is definitely key. Not going in just saying you have to make money and build the product and sell it.
Right.
Learning is just as valuable.
And then the other thing is to know what you don't know, because that's also something that has not changed, is that, it's very rare to find somebody who's an expert in product design and salesmanship and marketing and billing and taxes. Hardly anybody, and HR, hardly anybody's an expert in all that stuff. And especially when you start your business as a younger person, you should definitely seek out expertise. Adults love helping enterprising teenagers. So your parents' friends, do informational interviews, ask somebody else to design your website for you if that's not your thing, and offer to take their prom pictures in exchange. Like barter economy is great for young people. So it's your product, it's your passion, it's your vision, but definitely take advantage of other people's expertise to make that learning curve easier for you, so that you're not reinventing the wheel with stuff that other people might already be good at and could just show you how to do.
Definitely. Yeah. So you said that you think one of the things that has changed is communication with online and in person, and how you have to communicate things. So what advice would you give to these teenage girls on the best way to communicate now?
Well, if you're talking about sales communication, what you have to figure out is who is your buyer and what is that person looking for, or what's going to be appealing to that person. Because like, you know, you can sell your product and be like, this product will straighten your hair, and this product will help you put your makeup on, and this product will make you look amazing in your prom photos. And if your buyers are a bunch of bald guys, you know, your product may be great with those things, but those are not like the advantages that's going to get those bald guys to pull the trigger on what you've got, right? And so what you want to do is think not just about the physical needs, but about the psychological needs. So like, for example, let's say your business is, you're a photographer and you're taking prom pictures of your friends or graduation pictures of your friends, right? Their parents are going to say, well, my sister or my friend had this professional photographer take these gorgeous pictures. Why don't we just go to, like, you know, Mr. Smith's prom pictures? That's your competition, right? So you can't promise to take more amazing pictures than Mr. Smith, probably, because Mr. Smith is probably pretty good and he has a fancy studio and he has lots of expertise and he likely has a more expensive website than you. But what are your friends' psychological needs? They don't want to get their picture taken by Mr. Smith, some like random guy they don't even know, recommended by an adult, right? They want their pictures taken by you, their buddy, who's going to go to like their favorite spot. You know all about them. You're going to make the experience like so much more fun than this impersonal professional would make it. So you've got to think, okay, I can't compete necessarily in producing like higher quality photos or something like that, but I can compete on saying this is going to be tons more fun if we do this together than getting some guy you don't even know from your mom's friend to come and do that. And those are the psychological needs that are going to get your friend to be like, but I don't want Mr. Smith. I want Mary to do it. Mary's going to go to the stables with me at sunrise, and we're going to take pictures with the horses, you know, which you suggested because you know her and you know she loves horses. Mr. Smith doesn't know she loves horses. So think about what is going to psychologically make people want my product. And that might be because the product is great, or in the case of prom pictures, maybe the experience is great. Or maybe you are great, and maybe your earrings are not the most fabulous earrings, but boy, those pictures of you wearing them look amazing, and people want to look like you know, in the picture, or whatever it is. So this is what's called your competitive advantage. And when you're a young person, it may not be a competitive advantage based on quality because you're young and you may not have advanced materials or a fancy studio.
Mm-hmm.
But you have some competitive advantage that makes your product really awesome, and you got to figure out what that is and then how to communicate to that. And don't forget the value of testimonials, because teenagers are highly influenced by their friends. So if you can have pictures of other people who they know who've used your product or used your service up on your website, that's the way to go. Word of mouth.
That's a great thing to keep in mind. I think a lot of people can forget it's not just about the product.
Mm-mm. No, it's not about the product at all. I mean, there are a few occasions where it is, like if it's medication. It's about the product. But most of us are selling things that other people are also providing.
Right.
So we'll choose. You seem to be muted.
Can you hear me?
Nope, you were muted.
Okay, sorry, you froze for a while. Your screen's still frozen. I can hear you though.
The last thing I said was locally grown. I said maybe your stuff is sustainably sourced or locally grown.
Okay.
Yeah, so
What
that's what I
about,
was saying. Your competitive advantage may not be the product, it may be the way that it's produced.
right.
Like earrings, for example, are entirely made of pieces of jewelry that I took apart and made again. So I'm not using new items. I'm reusing and recycling other stuff. So that's a competitive advantage I have.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Do you think young age can be a competitive advantage as an entrepreneur?
Oh yes, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, it's an advantage in two ways. One is people love to help kids. So people love the idea that, like a few years ago, we hired some students to put bands around our trees we lived in North Carolina, and there are worms that can damage your trees. So every year you need to have the trees banded so that the worms don't get into your trees. And one of my students was running a tree banding service. And we had always thought about hiring tree banding before, and we kind of hadn't done it, and we weren't really sure. But when it was my student, of course, I love my student. I want to help him. I want to encourage him to make money and work hard. So yeah, people will help out kids, buy things from kids that they often won't. That's how Girl Scout cookies work, right? You just love
Yeah.
buying things from young people. So that's the one. And the second is that very often you can offer a price advantage, because Mr. Smith is trying to support his family by taking prom pictures. You are probably not supporting your family taking prom pictures. You are probably just having fun with your camera and your friends and maybe saving for college for prom pictures. So it's entirely possible that you may be able to offer something at a little bit of a lower price. And then the other thing that's nice about being young is people don't expect perfect service. So it's okay if your email communication maybe isn't the greatest, or your product isn't like the most professional, because people aren't expecting you to do, everything right the way that an adult would. So I think getting involved in entrepreneurship when you're young it's a great idea if it's something that you're interested in doing.
Right. Those are great things to keep in mind, because I think a lot of times people, me included, I would focus on the negatives and what, people wouldn't take me seriously, but I think a lot more times they lean towards what you were saying.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you can always be really humble and open. Like I've had kids who were like, I want to do such and such, but I have to make sure my mom can drive me. Can I get back to you about what time would be good? And I'm like, sure. Like there's no need to pretend that you're an adult running a business. Everybody can see that you are not, you know? So yeah, so everything that you can do, to be honest, you just want to make sure that as far as it depends on you, you're working hard to produce the best product that you can. And then a big smile and just asking for feedback, right? So smile a lot. And then at the end say, how was your experience with this service? Is there anything you'd like to tell us that we could do to improve? And as long as you're sincere and honest, people will give you advice and input and whatever. But the nice thing about being a young person starting a business is you're probably not starting a life and death business, because you're not a doctor, you're selling something, or you're cutting people's lawns or whatever it is. So it's not like it has to be perfect. You're probably not charging people $10,000 for your product, whatever it is. It's probably a low stakes, small sort of thing. And so people are going to be forgiving if things aren't perfect.
Yeah, it's definitely more of a learning experience.
Yep.
So if you could go back in time to the founding of your tutoring company or your jewelry company when you were 8, I guess both, and give yourself a piece of advice, what would you say?
I think if I were going to go back to the founding of the tutoring company, I think what I would say is consider whether this activity is really in line with your personal values. And remember that your personal values are important to you, even if they're not important to others. It was no secret to my friends and family that I was struggling with the ethics of tutoring people for the SAT. But nobody said, you know what, if you're really that upset about it, maybe you should think about why. Maybe this isn't for you. Everybody said, no, you're helping people. Your clients love you. It was like the entire external world was more important than me. And because of that, I just believed them. I just was like, well, I guess I'm helping people. I guess my clients love me. I guess I should keep doing this, even though it's not really like, it's your business. There's no point in starting a business that you don't really like, because there are many businesses that can be started and you can always tweak it. So don't just like take the opportunity that's right in front of you. That may not be the right opportunity for you. Or if you do take it, think about how you can maneuver it into something. Don't ignore that inner voice that was like, I'm not sure this is for me. Like, even if other people to tell you to ignore it, ignore them. And I think to the 8-year-old me, I would say, this is going to last a lot longer than you think. And I would say, good for you for starting young so you could learn these lessons early.
Yeah, well, it's nice that you have both perspectives of a business you really are passionate about, and then the other one knowing the opposite and being able to tell that. I think that's a
Yeah.
really important thing.
And I've made the same mistake with the earring business though, which is making things that I thought were going to sell, even though I wasn't really passionate about them. And then they didn't sell. And now I'm kind of stuck with some extra stock, and I'm trying to figure out, I have like 20 pairs of earrings with bows and arrows on them for like a specific reason. And I'm like, oh, I gotta find the like local archery guild for the my bow and arrow earrings. Yeah.
I'll find it.
Yep. It's a roller coaster. A roller coaster for sure.
So our last question is, can you share a funny story from your career as an entrepreneur? Either business. You have a lot to choose from.
A funny story. So I had this parent once, and this was the 4th kid that I'd worked with this parent, and so it was her 4th son, and she called me up one day and she was like, ugh, he just won't listen to me when I give him this piece of advice. Can you just give him this advice for me? And I was like, okay. So I asked her, it was good advice, I thought. So he came into the session and I was like, and I just kind of casually asked about it. I didn't say like, your mom called me and she, but I just brought it up, and I wove the advice into the session, and then he went home, and she called me up about 40 minutes later and she was like, Robin, do you know what he said when he came home? And I was like, no. He said, Mom, Mrs. Poole said something really interesting to me. She said, and then he repeated verbatim exactly what I said, which was exactly what she had told me to say. And he said, I think she's making a really interesting point, and I'm definitely going to think about that. And the mom said, she's like, honestly, I didn't know whether to like smile or strangle him. But I decided to just smile and say, that's great, honey. I agree. I think that is a good point, and I'm glad you're going to think about it, and just like let him walk away.
Oh my gosh. Well, that's a smart strategy by the mom.
It was a smart strategy. And I think, this is an example of the mom really making use of all of her resources, right? She was like, I want my son to know this. He's not listening to me. Maybe he'll listen to somebody else, say that. And I really admired her self-restraint in not being like, well, it's about time, because I've been trying to tell you that for the last week. She was like willing to let his mental process like proceed the way that it should. And this is true of businesses. Sometimes you think the business should grow, you think the product should sell, you think you should be selling this thing or that thing, you think this is the perfect target market, and it's not, or it doesn't, but maybe it is next year, or maybe you just need to find a different store to sell your stuff in, or maybe you need to change your marketing material, and instead of focusing on the qualities of the product, you need to focus more on pictures of happy users, right? Explaining the user experience and how much of a difference in their lives this has made. There's some degree to which building a business is like raising children. It's not like a spreadsheet where you plug stuff in at the top and everything works out exactly the way you think it's going to work at the bottom. Sometimes things head in unexpected directions. And I think there's an art to like holding the reins loosely, where you're still guiding, and doing things that work for you and making sensible decisions, but you're also open to what the world is giving you, because being an entrepreneur is a perennial dance between what you want and what your buyers are actually willing to give you money for, essentially. And it doesn't do too well to be like frustrated that your dance partner is not following the exact steps you've laid out for them. But on the other hand, you do need to guide them. Sometimes people don't realize they need your product, you know, or they don't understand that they have a lack in their lives. So you have to kind of be gentle but purposeful, and then always be alert for, you know, which way the music is playing, so that you can hopefully have the most harmonious dance you have and not just be frustrated fighting with your market back and forth.
Definitely. Striking that balance is critical, especially as an entrepreneur where things aren't a 9 to 5.
Right.
So do you have any more pieces of advice or anything else you want to say before we end?
Yeah, actually. So I was talking to a student the other day about this, and it kind of occurred to me as we were doing our interview here. So you know how in a meal, right, like if you're cooking a dish or something like that, you want the bulk of the ingredients to be like healthy, leafy greens, whole grains, you know, like organic, whatever it is. Like the bulk of it is good, healthy, positive ingredients that will give you a delicious dish, right? Yeah. And then you have like a little bit of salt, right? Or a little bit of seasoning or whatever it is that brings out the extra kick in your dish, right? That makes it extra delicious or brings it all together or something, right? So in our analogy, this is your thoughts about your business, and this is other people's thoughts about your business. The bulk has to be your ideas, your passion, which way you want to go, your internal values, your vision for what's going to give you a happy life. And then you'll have a little bit of seasoning where other people give you some good hints, right? Or help you with your billing, or you've got an accountant who does the taxes or whatever. Now, the thing is that if you are a certain kind of person, it's easy to solicit this much salt. And people are constantly salting you, constantly showering you with their thoughts on everything. And your job is to take this big chunk of salt and seasoning and herbs and figure out which little bit is the right bit for you. Of all of the 10 pieces of advice people gave you, which are the 2 that are really gonna, you know, add the extra kick to your business, the areas of weakness, the thing you never thought of, that thing that somebody says and you're like, oh my gosh, that's a great idea, I should totally do that. It's your job to filter all those down to just the few things that really are going to help you get your business together. And that takes trial and error. There are going to be times when you took people's advice and it wasn't good, and other times where you didn't and you're like, man, I should have listened to so and so. But you know, as your learning curve accelerates, you'll get the hang of that. And I think that's the key to building a business that is successful, but that you also really like.
I think that was the salt right there, that piece of advice. That was great. That was really
good.
Interesting. I've never heard that before.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to interview today. This was super valuable information for anyone who's going to watch it.
Great. Well, I feel like I want to thank you for starting this program and putting this website together. And I think people are gonna really benefit from your efforts. And I'm excited to see where this goes for you.
Thank you. Me too. Thank you for being a part of it.
You're welcome.